the answer is no, he's not injury prone because he's so fun to watch, man. He is just, he's such a beast. And I would love to see him healthy.
I want to transition and just get your feedback on what you're seeing in trends in the league so far in terms of injuries. I think last time we spoke, you said you didn't really see any of the irregularities. Are you seeing now? We're pretty much in, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't seen too many players sit out because of COVID. So it seems like that's been mitigated compared to just a couple of years ago. Are you seeing any trends in terms of a spike injuries down that's consistent since things are basically back to normal from like a basketball standpoint, you think?
We're definitely seeing a major increase in games lost to COVID and illnesses in general, which is going to drastically help the final numbers. We know last year set a record high for total games lost to injury or illness, and largely to that Omicron variant that hit and ravaged the league from about mid-December through January. We had we had to have expanded rosters to just make up for that because you had guys that were coming in testing positive and things like that. So that's been the big turnaround. So I think as we're recording this, I think we're at the 87% mark of games played. We're on pace for over 5,000 games lost. Last season, it was 7,000 games. So a pretty big dip down. Now, 5,000 over anything over 5,000 for the most part has historically been pretty high. That being said, those numbers have been, that's kind of where we've been the last 5 to 6 seasons. We kind of have to throw out the lockout, or not the lockout, the bubble season because of the hiatus. But the years leading up to that, before that, there'd only been one season where they've been over 5,000 since 05-06. So now there's been consistently, we're probably looking at that's going to be the bare minimum based on kind of the way we handle injuries at this point. I would love to see that number decline. As far as like trends, the one injury that I'm starting to see a little pop back up a little bit more, which I'm not surprised, I thought it might happen a little earlier, is we're starting to see some stress related injuries prop back up. And I think that's as we get used to the ramifications of that lockout shortened season, or the bubble season, followed by the compressed season, followed by the next season, which still was abnormal. We had the Olympics in the summer and, the truncated off season and things like that. So guys like Cade Cunningham, missed almost the entire season due to stress related injury. That's what limited Anthony Davis and is still limiting him, and those kinds of injuries. I was expecting them to be more of an issue last year, but maybe now we're starting to see some of the long-term effects of that alteration of the normal beats of a normal season. So that's kind of what I'm keeping my eye on. Ankle sprains, things like that seem to be kind of basically where they always are. But the stress injuries are one I'll be tracking for the rest of the season as well as into next year. And the good news is knock on wood, some of the bigger injuries, we just haven't seen as many that we did see a big spike in Achilles tendon tears a couple years back. Hopefully we've seen kind of those numbers go down a little bit too, but that doesn't mean they won't happen. And, just hopefully it's keep our fingers crossed. It's nobody suffers the injury, and definitely nobody noteworthy in terms of a guy like Durant when he did his.
So what do you see as a solid preventive measure for the league? If, I never thought we would see like a pandemic like we did in 2020. If it happens again from a kind of sports standpoint, what can players do to mitigate the risk of injury if it does happen again? I mean, I can't sit here and say it would never happen again. I mean, just because of what happened in 2020. So, I mean, do you think players have learned from that period of time where if something like that does happen again, they can mitigate the risk for injury in a preparation for that?
Yeah, I definitely think you're going to start. I mean, part of it is just experience, right? We've all been through it. If it were to happen tomorrow, I think we'd all kind of be in a completely different situation than we were than the initial wave, because we didn't know what was going on. Sure. I think we've all kind of learned how to adapt a little bit. We know how to work from home a little bit more. I think the players now, there are a lot more tools that are available in terms of at-home gyms and at-home policies and at-home things that you can do that teams had to figure out the first time from fresh. Well, now we wouldn't be starting from scratch. We'd be able to handle and mitigate things a little bit better. That being said, it's still problematic in terms of getting to a gym. Not all players have courts in their house, finding the access space, those kinds of things. But I do think between the hiatus, the bubble, and then the following year where there were so many strict protocols in place, if something were to happen again, we'd at least be in a better starting point than we were previously.
And I want to ask just about comparing this era of athlete as well. It seems like this era of athlete, I have heard from just older NBA veterans that they know how to take care of their bodies, compared to just the 90s, the 80s, et cetera. What are you seeing in terms of what are they doing? Like you mentioned the home gyms, like there's any other trends that you're seeing in terms of maybe medical staffs, like the evolution from maybe like the 90s to now? Is that just due to just the increase of competition in terms of the athleticism of the athletes that are taking place, or talk about that, this evolution, you think?
Yeah, so I think you and I can both agree the game itself has evolved, right? If you go look at just the numbers alone this year in terms of scoring, I mean, how many 60, 70-point games have we had? The use of the 3-point shot, the pace of the game is all drastically different than in the early 2000s and into the 90s. And that's because our athletes have also evolved. We can't sit there and say, well, just the game has evolved. The athlete has also evolved. If you put a guy that looked like Steph Curry and told anybody in 2000 or the 90s, he would be the face of the league just about, they might have laughed at you because his skill set, his size, that was not conducive to being productive. And then you also, on the other end of that, you throw in a guy like Porzingis or Wembanyama in this upcoming draft, these bigger guys. Dirk Nowitzki, even, he was the unicorn back then. So the game has evolved, but the demands have changed as well, right? You didn't see Shaq have to guard the three-point line. Yeah. He would have to do that in today's game, which would require more starts and stops on his frame, stretching the court, expanding the court, where he would have more ground to cover. It would not be quite as plodding. Embiid, even a guy who is probably the closest thing we have to Shaq in the game right now, will stretch his game out and shoot the three. So, that changes how the body is loaded in these games. And so I think the game has evolved. I think the game and the athlete has evolved. Now, again, the smarter we get, we have more tools at our disposal. You don't have players smoking as much, I think I think it would be naive to say no one in the NBA smokes, but I don't think you would see it as regular as it is, or it was, excuse me. Teams now hire dietitians. Meals are catered pre-practice, post-practice, on the plane, as opposed to a guy being sent on his own, especially a young guy who all he knows is, go through the drive-thru, grab some fast food. So there's more tools at their disposal. But I also think we're kind of oversaturated the market a little bit too. We're trying to figure out what's noise and what is applicable and it's a lot. It's like trying to drink out of a fire hydrant. You can probably do it if you hold a cup up there and sip, but if you're trying to just take it all in, it's just too much. So trying to read through the noise, find what recovery tools, what modalities, what techniques are useful, what aren't, how can we improve, how's it going to work for a guard versus a center? It's an evolving process. And so, I think you're seeing players invest more in their bodies. I think you're also seeing players potentially play more, which can potentially be part of the problem. You don't have guys just the season ends and they don't go play. They're in the gym consistently, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. I think previously you and I talked about, when you're driving your car, you rotate your tires every so many miles. Yeah. These guys need to rotate their tires, and some of them don't. They never stop and let their body naturally catch back up to the wear and tear that they place on it. So, I think in a lot of ways we're in a much better place. But I still think it's not perfect. And I still think there are things we have to figure out to put our athletes in the best position possible, make sure they're not buying into stuff that isn't necessarily helpful, that, is not just a trend or a fad, is going to be helpful, and really do everything we can. And that's, you're seeing teams buy in. I said it earlier. It used to be the head athletic trainer, maybe an assistant, maybe a PT. And now you look at the staffs around the leagues and it's multiple ATs on staff, a dietitian, a masseuse, a physical therapist, all these different specialties in that wheelhouse of sports medicine, which is great because you're allowing people to focus on their specific area while still allowing plenty of options to come in and treat the athlete.
So we had a reporter that covers the New Orleans Pelicans, and I asked him about Zion Williamson, his injuries, and he basically said it was kind of like a state of flukes, like it wasn't anything like consistent. And now he suffered another injury. I'm just wondering, for such a hyped up prospect, What do you think if you were to predict the future, are you concerned just in terms of the rest of his NBA future and what we're seeing? Or is it just kind of, hey, just let it run its course and it's unfair to label him as injury prone, for instance?
It's probably a little bit of both, not to sound a little too wishy-washy there, but I definitely think when a guy has multiple injuries on the same side over a prolonged period of time, there should be some concern. There needs to be some evaluating. Um, there have been a couple of the injuries that were non-contact, and that's ones you hope you can reduce the risk of happening. You can't stop somebody from coming down on someone's foot. You can't prevent someone punching you in the face and breaking a bone, or you break your hand, or things like that. Zion's injuries have been unfortunate, and you look at the overall cumulative mass of them all, and it is concerning from the standpoint of they're all seem to be kind of on the same side or interlinked and those kinds of things. But there have been plenty of guys, look at Joel Embiid, that have had these labels, these injury prone labels, and just needed time to figure it out, continue developing, and then have a stretch of sustained luck, in terms of, just avoiding that injury bug. And then the other thing that is unfortunate with Zion is it's the same. What makes him a little bit of a high risk player is the same thing that makes him so valuable. You've never had a guy and his body move like he moves. That's so explosive, that is so fast, yet, he's not a power forward, but he's not a shooting guard. But, if you ask him to potentially lose a lot of weight, does he lose that explosiveness and strength? And if he bulks up too much or tries to do different things in terms of that body mass, does that impact his explosiveness? And so again, it's finding that happy medium for him, that where he can be productive and effective on the court, but also mitigate and lower his injury risk. And, I have the utmost respect for the Pelicans medical staff. They are one of the highly rated groups. And, unfortunately, hamstring injuries like the one he's suffering are prone to aggravation. It doesn't matter who you are. They're one of the higher risk injuries of secondary issues and things like that. So, it's tricky. It's a loaded question, and it's one that I hope we find the answer to. And the answer is no, he's not injury prone, because he's so fun to watch, man. He is just, he's such a beast, and I would love to see him healthy for sure.
One thing that happened in the most recent Mavericks game, where they shamefully lost against the, I'm sorry, but pathetic Charlotte Hornets. They lost twice in a row, back to back, against the Hornets. Something was said. So we don't know the full details. I have to say that right off the bat. But something was said by a fan that bothered Kyrie Irving. This is not the first time this has ever happened in an NBA game. I can think of LeBron James doing this. I can think of Russell Westbrook doing this in different cases. But is something that I think visually watching a game is very odd to see unfold, and then you have no context as to what happened that justified it. And what I'm referring to is we get a stoppage of play, and Kyrie Irving walks, I would say, about 3/4 of the way across the court with an official and points out to security, a gentleman, well, maybe not a gentleman, depending on what was said, but a person who was sitting out in the crowd, and just has him removed from the game. Just tell them, get him out of here. Again, I don't know what he said. There were rumors that I saw that he was saying that the earth is round, to mock Kyrie Irving for that infamous flat earth interview a couple years back, several years back at this point. My question here, to get to the point, is it's weird optics to see a player kicking out a fan. And I don't think a player on the other side of things should have the responsibility to be like security and managing this situation. Should it be allowable for players to just say to presumably a paying customer, like, get out of here? And should we be given more info on why that happened?
So let me ask you a question, Matt. So you saw the Nuggets play the Rockets last year.
Right.
You're close.
We had
Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
That's right.
How much security was around in that area? Would you say? Not ticket people.
Yeah.
Actual like security.
Yeah, that's a good question. It was probably, I would say, maybe half a dozen security members on the floor, maybe a little
quite
bit
a
more
lot.
than that. Of course, we're talking more than a year ago that I was at that game, so my memory could be hazy. I don't remember a whole lot of security, I guess is my point.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's tough because
It is. Yeah.
back in the, I guess, and a lot of the NBA old timers, the good old days, like with Charles Barkley, we are talking about this off air. He punched fans, he spit on fans, like just because of the heinous stuff they were calling him. And they weren't, I don't think they were ragging on him because of his field goal percentage. It was racial. And I think from that regard, athletes pointing out fans, and I see it in a fairly calm manner, except Russell Westbrook. Um, I don't have a problem with. I think the issue now, are there negatives for sure? Right? Like, what are these fans actually saying? And I think you get into, ruining the fan experience, right? Like, me and you were in college, right, Matt? Like, along
For
with our
sure.
buddies, I mean, we took pleasure in hazing the other team. Now it goes over the line. I think we've seen that now with the advent of social media. Race gets brought into it,
Yeah.
personal lies get
Not with
brought
us,
into
but
it.
certainly
Yeah.
it can.
Yeah, not with us in college, but just
Right.
other fans nowadays. So it gets really, really personal. So things go over the line. So I think, like you said, that's where security needs to be mindful. I think a code of conduct with the fans would be the most appropriate, and that's obvious, right? Like nothing racial, anti-Semitic, sexist, homophobic. I mean, those are basic things that should not be said in any venue of entertainment. And I think for security should take care of that. I think where you get into sketchy territories, like with the flat Earth, I don't have a problem with the fans saying that. I don't have a problem with um, him talking to Kyrie, being like, "Hey, like I don't know, if you miss five free throws in a row, that would never happen." But let's just say he's struggling at the line, like you suck from from the line, like you're a bum. Like I don't. To me, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think I don't know what is the old adage, and if I get inappropriate, I apologize. But wasn't it like a senator, like he was saying, like, how do you spot obscene content? Like you kind of know it when you see it, right?
Right.
Like we know what's obscene. I mean, come on, it doesn't take too much of a genius to decipher that. So I think I agree with the security being the first line of defense, but I would say compared to compared to athletes laying their hands on fans or it getting physical. I agree with the athlete pointing out the fan. If that's going to avoid another mouse in the palace situation, then so be it. But is there another way for sure? This puts have security, just be more mindful of what's going on.
Right. Yeah, and I guess my kind of larger point is I think the NBA right now with many of its fans, I think there's an image problem. There's a problem with load management. There is a narrative that's going around that players just don't care about the fans, like whatever, I'm going to take a night off. Those things do happen from time to time, of course, just naturally. It seems like it's happening more and more, and it's not really a big deal. Like there was the incident in Cleveland, I want to say about 20 games back or so, where it just seemed like star players were always ducking out when they were playing in Cleveland, which is not great for Cleveland fans who are paying to go to games. And I'm so grateful that, again, the game I went to, the Stars were all playing. Everyone who was healthy and available were playing. That's not always the case in these NBA games. It gives off the optics that the players just don't care about the fans. Now, by far, in my opinion, this is still far more the exception than the rule. When you add that with optics of a player just being able to point to someone and they're out of here, I think there is certainly there needs to be a process in that person getting kicked out. Now, I don't want to go to bat for that guy that Kyrie got kicked out from that game. I mean, he could have been saying something awful. I just don't know.
We don't know what it is.
So yeah, so it's all hearsay and I don't know. So I'm not going to sit here and defend him. I think my point would be, I would just want to see some kind of process that the NBA has. Like Kyrie talks to security, they talk to fans around him. Can they vouch for him or not? Now we can't fully rely on that either. If he's surrounded by his buddies or whatever, like they're not going to rat him out or whatever. I don't know. It's a messy topic. I definitely agree with that. But to me, it's just weird to have a break in the game and a player like kick out a fan. Like, can we at least have some sort of go between, like go talk to security, describe the fan, so that we don't have the optics of a player like, you get out of here. And yes, of course, I'm with you. I don't want things to escalate to fighting in the stands and stuff like that. Yeah, nobody wants to see that, especially not the NBA, who's trying to protect their image. And this is, in my opinion, part of it.
Yeah, a couple of points. One, I think there's just a lack of security at all sporting events. I just think there's footage that gets leaked online about fans fighting. There's been multiple incidents, specifically in Major League Baseball, of fans, getting seriously hurt. So I think that's due to a lack of security. So that should be improved. And I agree with you. There should be a clear SOP in terms of, hey, player has a problem with the fan, security is in the vicinity. What happened, in terms of that incident? Is it warrant to get the fan out of there? Is it not? And then go from there. So I agree with you. What I what I will say to your earlier point in terms of the fans and their, I guess, displeasure. We had Jeff Stotts on recently, and he said the league has taken steps to curb low management in terms of, the baseball back-to-backs, just limiting the back-to-backs in general. And I think that's to be commended for the league. I think you're right, especially where I live in an NBA city. It would be disheartening just for a player just to sit out. And I think now, especially, we've seen this year in particular, it's so tight. Like if your player sits out, you're going to hurt your team unless you're Memphis or Denver. But you take a look at like Dallas can't, like Luka can't sit out games, Kyrie can't sit out games. Like they're in a playoff race. Like you're separated by, even though the Mavericks are struggling, like if they get on a little bit of a winning streak here, who knows? I mean, even though the season's winding down here, I mean, it's really tight. I mean, you can't afford to sit anybody these days because it's the talent in the league is so close in terms of the athletes on there. So I don't know. To me, in terms of fans being outraged, I got to see a little bit more of like hardcore data in terms of attendance. I mean, last time I checked, I think attendance is still pretty solid in the league. You have to take a look at television ratings and all those metrics to see, if that's really hurting the league itself. Not to mention gambling as well. Like, I think there's a lot of factors to include that. I think, is it a bummer for the fans? Which I agree with you. It's true. If like the Bulls come into town and all of a sudden just Zach LaVine just sits out, that sucks. I'm not going to lie to you. But at the same time, is that going to the bottom line at the league, is that going to really be hurting the league? I don't know, because television ratings really run the league. So, the Thursday night games, that's what they care about. Thursday, Saturday, those are the games that they care about from a revenue standpoint. I mean, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Sunday, really going to care? So I think there's other dynamics at play in terms of low management, how that's going to really affect the league's bottom line.
Yeah, and I guess that would be some of the frustration that I've heard, is that the league, it should be commended, they've been bending over backwards to try and get rid of those back-to-backs, and yet it's been, and I would say, I would agree with the point you just made, that right now, like, we are solidifying playoff spots, so it's less likely for someone to rest. But the fact that it was happening, before the All-Star break and things like that, and right around the same time that Cleveland story was coming out, and that was a main headline, I think would be the concern.